Welcome, English 3 students. This video will focus on reviewing SAT grammar and conventions questions to help you prepare for the CISD Q1 quarterly assessment, which will be the last major grade of this 9 weeks. In order to maximize the benefits of this review, please make sure you are both watching and listening as the video progresses. There will be a review guide posted in your English Canvas course after we have completed reviewing all of the different types of questions you will see. But for now, stay engaged and focused on learning the information as it is presented. This short review focuses on transition questions. You'll see these on both the SAT and the English 3 Q1 quarterly assessment. By the end, you'll know the 3 transition types that will be tested this quarter and a simple, repeatable strategy to pick the best answer. Transitions are the glue that holds ideas together. They connect sentences and tell the reader how those sentences relate. For example, whether one sentence gives an example, shows order, or repeats an idea. These are the common transition types: exemplification, sequence order, agreement similarity, disagreement and contrast, addition, cause effect, and clarification. Since this is a quarterly assessment review, we will only focus on the ones you'll be tested on for quarter 1. For this QA, you only need to understand 3 transition types: exemplification, sequence order, and agreement similarity. If you spot a choice that's not one of these 3, you can usually eliminate it right away. To choose the correct answer for transitions questions, examine the type of relationship between sentences and then choose the most logical option. When you pick an answer, first ask, what kind of relationship exists between these sentences? Is the next sentence giving an example, showing a next step in a sequence, or repeating or supporting the same idea? Use that clue to narrow your choices. Transitions questions give a short passage with a blank and 4 choices. The prompt always asks, which choice completes the text with the most logical transition? First, let's take a look at exemplification transitions. Exemplification transitions are used to introduce examples that clarify, illustrate, or support an idea. Are the sentences organized to provide an example of a claim? If so, we want to use an exemplification transition. Common words include, for example, for instance, specifically, to illustrate, for one thing, and to demonstrate. If the sentence with the blank looks like an example to support a claim being made before it, think exemplification. Look at this passage that uses an exemplification transition. Throughout history, painters were endangered by poisonous ingredients in their paints. The use of lead in white paint, for instance, caused lead poisoning in many famous artists, including Vincent van Gogh. Here, the second sentence names a specific case that proves or explains the first sentence's claim. So an exemplification transition is used. Now let's see what this type of question looks like using this same example. Here is the question by itself, so you can get a feel for what it looks like. Notice the question gives you a short passage that contains a blank, and then asks you which choice completes the text with the most logical transition. First, it is very important that you read the passage in its entirety so you can determine the relationship between the sentences. Remember, for this Q1 assessment, you will only be tested on 3 types of transitions: exemplification, sequence order, or agreement similarity. So you only have to look for these types. Let's read it again with the blank. Throughout history, painters were endangered by poisonous ingredients in their paints. The use of lead in white paint, blank, caused lead poisoning in many famous artists, including Vincent van Gogh. As you read the passage, it is likely your mind will fill in the blank with a transition that makes sense. This is great, but hold that thought as you complete the next 2 steps of the strategy. Next, take a close look at the answer choices. You can immediately eliminate those options that aren't exemplification, sequence order, and agreement similarity. For example, I immediately noticed that in addition is an addition transition type, and nevertheless is a disagreement contrast transition type, so I can eliminate them. I want to keep meanwhile because it's a sequence order transition type, and that is one of the 3 tested on this exam. Right now, you only know what the common transitions are for exemplification, such as, for example, for instance, specifically, to illustrate, for one thing, and to demonstrate. But we will get to those common types for sequence order and agreement similarity in just a moment. Just a quick note. This part of the strategy for answering transitions is specific to this Q1 assessment. When you take the SAT, you will have various transitions that also include the other types. So this part of the strategy would not be beneficial. Eventually, we will give you everything you need on the other transition types, so you will be prepared for the other quarterly assessments and the SAT. But now we must choose the most logical option. Now read the passage with the 2 options that are left. The use of lead in white paint, meanwhile, caused lead poisoning. Or, the use of lead in white paint, for instance, caused lead poisoning. The first option, meanwhile, is suggesting there have been other sequence order transition words that have come before it. But when we look back, they have not. The second option, for instance, reads naturally and is providing an example of an instance that proves the claim, so it is the better option. We should choose D, for instance. For instance is the best option because it makes the most logical sense. The passage claims that poisonous ingredients in paints have endangered artists, and the lead poisoning is providing an example of this claim. Next, let's examine sequence order transitions. Sequence order transitions are used to show the order or position of ideas, steps, or events. Are the events in the sentences being organized by time or by position? If so, we want to use a sequence order transition. Some common sequence order words are first, second, previously, before, later, finally, next, then, and subsequently. If the sentence with the blank looks like it begins with an order word because another one is in a sentence before it, think sequence order. Look at this passage that uses a sequence order transition. Marie Curie made groundbreaking discoveries in the field of radioactivity. First, she identified 2 new elements, polonium and radium. Second, she discovered that the radium could be used to destroy cancer cells, laying the foundation for radiation therapy. Here, the third sentence begins with an order transition word, and we can clearly see that an order transition word appears in the sentence before it. Now let's see what this type of question looks like using this same example. Here is the question by itself. Again, notice the question gives you a short passage that contains a blank and then ask you which choice completes the text with the most logical transition. The first step is to read the entire passage while looking for the relationship between sentences. Remember, you only have to look for the three types of transitions on the Q1 exam: exemplification, sequence order, or agreement similarity. Let's read it again with the blank. Marie Curie made groundbreaking discoveries in the field of radioactivity. First, she identified two new elements, polonium and radium. Blank. She discovered that radium could be used to destroy cancer cells, laying the foundation for radiation therapy. Next, take a close look at the answer choices. You can immediately eliminate those options that aren't exemplification, sequence order, and agreement similarity. For example, I immediately noticed that instead is a disagreement contrast transition type, and so is still, so I can eliminate them. I want to keep specifically because it is an exemplification transition type, and that is one of the three tested on this exam. I also want to keep second because it is one of the common sequence order transitions, along with first, previously, before, later, finally, next, then, and subsequently. Now we must choose the most logical option. Finally, we need to insert the two options that are left into the passage. Specifically, she discovered that radium could be used to destroy cancer cells, laying the foundation for radiation therapy. Or, second, she discovered that radium could be used to destroy cancer cells, laying the foundation for radiation therapy. The first option, specifically, is suggesting that a specific example is about to be given to back up a claim made earlier in the passage, that Marie Curie made groundbreaking discoveries in the field of radioactivity. This is proving that claim. However, in the sentence before it, we see the sequence order word first. The second option, second, makes more logical sense because there have been sequence order transition words that have come before it. We can't leave first sitting there all by itself, so it's the best option. We would choose D, second. Second is the best option because it makes logical sense. The passage includes the sequence order word first earlier in the passage, so second is the next transition in that sequence. The third and final transition type we will examine is agreement similarity transitions. Agreement similarity transitions are used to show that the next idea supports, reinforces, or is similar to the one that came before. Do the sentences express the same underlying idea? If so, we want to use an agreement similarity transition. Common agreement similarity transitions include similarly, again, also, correspondingly, equally, and likewise. If the sentence with the blank looks like it is supporting, reinforcing, or is just very similar to a sentence coming before it, think agreement similarity. Look at this passage that uses an agreement similarity transition. Lentils are an excellent way to add plant-based protein to one's diet. Similarly, other legumes, like beans and chickpeas, can serve as integral protein sources for vegans and vegetarians. Here, the second sentence is explaining a different but similar example of a protein source. Now let's see what this type of question looks like using the same example. Examine the question by itself. By now, you know you must first read the entire passage to look for the relationship between sentences. You also know you will only be tested on three types of transitions: exemplification, sequence order, or agreement similarity. So you will be focused on searching for these types only. Let's read the passage again with the blank. Lentils are an excellent way to add plant-based protein to one's diet. Blank. Other legumes, like beans and chickpeas, can serve as integral protein sources for vegans and vegetarians. Second, you should take a close look at the answer choices. You can immediately eliminate those options that aren't exemplification, sequence order, and agreement similarity. For example, I noticed that thus is a cause-effect transition, and regardless is a disagreement-contrast transition. These are not one of the three being tested, so I can eliminate them. I want to keep specifically because it is an exemplification transition type, and that is one of the three tested on this exam. I also want to keep similarly because it is one of the common agreement similarity transitions, along with words like again, also, correspondingly, equally, and likewise. Now we must choose the most logical option. Finally, insert the two options that are left into the passage. Specifically, other legumes like beans and chickpeas can serve as integral protein sources for vegans and vegetarians. Or, similarly, other legumes like beans and chickpeas can serve as integral protein sources for vegans and vegetarians. The first option, specifically, is suggesting the remaining part of the sentence is giving a specific example of how lentils are an excellent way to add plant-based protein to one's diet. But it immediately mentions other legumes like beans and chickpeas. This is not a specific example of lentils. The second option, similarly, does provide a different but similar example of another plant-based protein that can serve as an integral source. So it is the better option. We should choose D, similarly. Similarly is the best option because it makes logical sense. The passage first mentions lentils and then explains that other legumes are also good protein sources. Other legumes are similar to lentils, so this is the best choice. You may have noticed all of our answers were D in this review. This was simply so we could walk you through all of the answer options and explain why the correct answer choice is indeed the correct one. Please don't assume D is the correct answer. You must follow the steps of the strategy to find the correct answer. Now you know the strategy for answering transition questions, both on the SAT and on your Q1 quarterly assessment. Although we only covered 3 transition types to specifically target this in the Q1 assessment, we will be covering the others as we progress through English 3. However, the strategy for choosing the best answer choice will essentially be the same. First, read the entire passage, looking for the relationship between the sentences. Second, eliminate any obviously wrong answer choices. And finally, plug in the remaining answer choices to see which fits better and choose the best option. Now it's time for you to practice what you have learned.